Welcome, everybody. I'm joined today by Natalie Webster. How's it going, Natalie?
Fabulous. It's a great day to not be in a cult.
Today is a great day not to be in a cult. It's truly amazing that you and I have never spoken in real life before until about 10 minutes ago.
I know.
I
Now
mean,
it's like worlds are colliding.
we have so many mutual friends.
Mhm.
We have a lot of shared history as far as Scientology and the
Yeah.
Sea Org goes. I mean, we've been friends on Facebook for probably 10 years.
Yeah.
And this is going to be so much fun. Before we get started, everyone, we are also streaming on Natalie's channel, Tonka Talk, Lake Minnetonka Community and Connection. She has a podcast. Okay, so now this YouTube channel. Help me not explain this incorrectly. You
Let
would
me
actually
explain it.
prefer people subscribe to the actual podcast that
Yes.
has
So,
the same name, right?
yeah. So the podcast you can find anywhere podcasts, anywhere you find them, and it's called Tonka Talk Community and Connection. And the long story short is my podcast is about the way people create and share community and connection. But on Fridays, I drop an episode where I share my Scientology story so people understand why I'm so obsessed with the ways people create community and connection because of my cult experience growing up in Scientology, how it impacted my family and my group and everything. Although I am likely going to be starting another YouTube channel where I can speak more about it. But for now,
Absolutely.
please do subscribe to the podcast or subscribe to the other Tonka Talk channel too. And then when I get another one going, we'll tell you.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, there's 100 different ways we could start this conversation. Let's just try to do it as organically as possible. So,
Okay.
you've been in the real world. You've been out of Scientology for how long now?
Almost 13 years. I think it'll be 13 years in January. Yeah, it's taken me this long too that, like I said, when I first left, I was going to leave. I was going to leave quietly. And then, as Scientology loves to do, they tried to mess with my family. And so I became vocal. And then I spent several years. It's a lot to process, which I think people know. That kind of goes without saying. And I just needed more time to really immerse myself in the real world. I don't know about you, Erin. I felt like an alien, like I had just arrived on the planet in ways, even though, I was out living life. You live in this isolated world in Scientology. And I've just been, exploring, figuring out who I am outside of Scientology without Scientology indoctrination. I'm still doing that. But now I'm ready to talk about it. I'm ready to process it. I actually had some doctors tell me that I should really process it. And the idea of this is how I'm going to process it. I'm going to talk about it just with everybody because I think it's probably easier.
One of the things that I want to discuss as much as possible in a whole bunch of conversations in the future
Mhm.
is going from the Scientology world, the Scientology way of thinking of right and wrong, the Scientology sense of morality, which is strangely
Mm.
puritanical for an organization that doesn't really think of itself as being religious,
Mhm.
and leaving Scientology and no longer believing in the construct and the bullshit and the reactive mind and all this stuff, but still kind of being married to this Scientology aspect of,
Mm.
or Scientology idea of morality.
Yeah.
And how hard it is to get rid of the concepts of what L. Ron Hubbard, or the Sea Org thought was
Mhm.
right and
Yeah.
wrong. And I'll tell you, I'm mentioning that kind of at the same time I'm thinking of one of the reasons my wife and I have stayed married for so long, even though 5 years ago we basically was like, this is insane. Like if we
Mhm.
didn't have kids, we would already be divorced. Isn't large part was because we wanted to do what we thought was best for the kids, but there was definitely another part of that was like, if we get a divorce, Scientology will have won.
Mm. I
And
can see how you would
still,
think that.
yeah, still living in ways that are dictated by what
Mhm.
Scientology would like or not like, or be happy about or not be happy about. And I'm wondering, because when you left Scientology, you were married, and how long after Scientology did you get a divorce? And did it have anything to do with the Scientology stuff?
It absolutely, I think, had a lot to do. My marriage had everything to do with Scientology. It was my second marriage. And I married my second husband after I had left the Sea Org and I was a Scientology parishioner with one foot out the door. And our connecting, he was a very dedicated Scientologist, was encouraged by the local Twin Cities organization. We were kind of pushed towards each other. I think the thought was that, hey, Natalie's kind of, floating around there. Let's get her kind of solidly really back. And so it was encouraged when I started dating my husband. And we were married for, I think, about 11 years. And we left Scientology together. It's actually an unusual story in that 3 generations of my family left Scientology. It took me 2
Wow.
years. I don't even know where to start. But as far as my husband goes, after we left Scientology, it was within 2 years, my mom passed, and my mom had been on OT7, but she left with us. My mom died, and then I got a divorce. And it was kind of the beginning of like, okay, even though I've left Scientology and it was a couple years after, it's here I am 13 years later. And I feel like it's taking me this long. I don't feel that I'm all the way where I would like to be. I don't know that I will be. I think it's sometimes this idea of recovery. It's to me, it's like when you lose someone, when you lose someone and they die, like my mom, you get kind of more used to not having her around, but you still think about her. There's still effects. There's the experience of growing up in Scientology and the Sea organization. It imprints on you in ways that even though you can get rid of the indoctrination, it doesn't change that when certain things happen that are traumatic, which to be honest, some of it I didn't even know was traumatic because I was just so used to living in fight or flight that you don't make that connection. And I feel like it's taking me this long to get to the point where, hey, I'm ready to start talking about this again. I need to process this, and which is literally what my neurologist told me. You need to process it. And I'm like, well, there's different ways you can do that. But for me, I have a background in podcasting and I had worked in radio for a while, and I love sharing people's stories. And I think to do that, I have to share mine. And I'm finally ready to talk about it. But I think it's an ongoing thing, this idea of recovering from being in a cult, being in Scientology. I was 5 when my mom married a Scientologist. Should we start back at the beginning?
No, that's a great place to start. So you were 5. Okay.
I was 5. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I grew up on Oahu. And my mom left my dad, and she went off to make a better life for us, is what she said. And she met and married a Scientologist. And it was kind of crazy because my mom at the time was working as an exotic dancer and met a Scientologist. And his name was Brian, and he also happened to be a paraplegic. And you know what? I'm not 100% sure if they met in the actual strip club. I think that's how the story went. I wish I'd asked my mom before she passed exactly. Because I'm like, did they meet in the strip club? Because I mean, it just sounds like some kind of movie, my stripper mom, my paraplegic.
Handicapped Scientologists are pretty rare because Scientology doesn't really look look kindly upon the disabled.
Yes. Brian had gotten into a car accident when he was in his 20s due to a drunk driver. It wasn't him. He was a passenger in the car. And as a result, he was paralyzed. But he taught himself to draw. He taught himself to sculpt, and he became an incredible wood carver in Hawaii, and he was known as the wood carver. My mom meets him, and my mom's coming out of, this. My mom was a teenage bride and was pregnant with me when she was 17 in school in Hawaii. And there was substance abuse going on. So Brian, this life in Scientology had more or would look to be more stable than the life that she had been living. And so he helped her get custody of us. We ended up then living with them and started, she was doing Scientology services. When I was about 9 years old, my mom was working for the Church of Scientology in Hawaii, which was in Waikiki. If you've ever been to Oahu, it was just a couple blocks from Waikiki Beach. And she would work in the evenings and on weekends. She was, in the foundation organization because she worked during the day with my stepdad. And my sister and I were always trying to make a buck because I'm a total sugar addict. Something I'm still working on, but we wanted to make money for candy. So we thought, hey, let's draw these pictures and sell them, right? We always had a hustle going. And first we tried selling them around the org and we got in trouble. Because we were
trying to build a business on the back of the org.
Ding, ding. Yep. This 9-year-old and 7-year-old with their little drawings for 25 cents was a bit of a distraction. So we thought, you know what? I'm taking this to the streets. So it's 1980 in Hawaii. My sister and I go out. No one's watching us. It was typical. You hear this a lot, I think, with people who grew up in Scientology. There's no supervision. My mom was doing her thing. She was having like flashbacks on the PRF, talking to plants. I mean, she was doing the purification rundown and she was a staff member, I think, at the same time. So my sister and I draw these pictures and we go outside and we're going to sell them. And there's a security guard across the street and his name was Mark and he would buy our pictures, 25 cents, 50 cents. We could go get some bubble gum or a sucker or whatever. My mom's job at the org was she was a body router, which most people who watch your channel probably know their job is to go out and get bodies and bring them in to do a personality test. I had heard my mom spiel for this personality test so many times that I kind of had it down. So I would tell Mark, hey, you should come over and do a personality test. And I don't recall what his reaction was about it. I just remember mostly the exchanging of money and we'd give him these pictures. One day, my mom sits us down and she's pissed. She is livid. She's like, we are not allowed to go to the org anymore. And in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, really? Oh. Wasn't my favorite place to be at that time. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because of you. You and your, well, she mostly blamed me. My sister was 2 years younger. I feel like I got, it was always me. And usually, honestly, it was. And Lana just went along with it. She's like, you brought the attention of the FBI to the church and it's not okay and blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, I'm getting there. Lean in, my children, lean in. And we're like, what? And I'm 9. I'm like, what the hell is the FBI? I'm like, this is not making sense to me. Eventually it gets explained to me. As I got older, I found out more. After we left Scientology, I told her my recollection. She said, that's exactly what happened. And then she told me more. So while my sister and I are going and we're selling these photos and saying, hey, come do a personality test to our friend Mark, the security guard, it's 1980. Mark turns out to be Mark David Chapman. And weeks later, he flew to New York and he shot and he killed John Lennon. Right? I know. Crazy. This is my Scientology origin story. So what happened was the FBI was looking because if you remember, what was it, 76, 77, 78, when the church infiltrated the U.S. government and then Mary Sue Hubbard went to jail and a bunch of other people went to jail. So this was just a few years prior. So in 1980, the church was super paranoid and about they're still not about the police and unless they're paying them, bringing that attention to the church, bringing the authorities and especially the FBI, which is not something I understood when I was 9. I was just trying to support my sugar habit. So we end up being banned by the church from the church for a while.
Well, and I'm cool. Did he have your pictures in his dossier or something? How was there any connection?
Well, as far as I was able to kind of figure out, either they got, video from these buildings, because he was a security guard outside of an apartment building and the church at the time was directly across the street. And interestingly, when I decided, I wanted to start sharing my story, I thought, oh, I should check some of this stuff. And I went on Google Maps and I looked it all up and yep, it was right across the street, just like I remembered. And it's funny, I looked up, I had never looked up Mark David Chapman before. And I looked it up and his Wikipedia talks about his love of art. I was just like, yeah, that plays. So I don't know if somebody from the church said something or they saw footage of us going back and forth. But here's the thing, Aaron, Mark David Chapman did go into the org before he went and killed John Lennon. So I'm like, did I inadvertently body route Mark David Chapman into the Church of Scientology when I was 9 years old? I don't know, maybe. It
Wow.
I'll explain later. Sometimes it would come up in my, because I did do some of the OT levels, and it would come up in my sec checks. So we end up, so this is going on. And so he did go in. And when he went in, he told them they were a cult. And he was kind of ranting about it. Interestingly, I found there's a video somewhere on YouTube, and I was so surprised to see a couple of the Hawaii staff members from back then talking about how he came into the org and exactly what I said. He called them a cult and la, 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 and they shoot him out of there. I was shocked that local staff members were allowed to speak to the media. And secondly, that they probably were thinking that maybe they'd get attention for Scientology through, the press of what was happening. I don't know. But so this happens and we're not allowed to go back. And then we're finally, because, they're short on people. They're not trying to ban people forever. It's not like my mom got declared or anything. So she says, okay, we can go back, but you guys need to start on course. You need to start your Scientology training. I refer to it as that's when we really seriously started our indoctrination. We weren't allowed to be back there on the grounds unless we were actively doing services. So we go back, and my sister and I start on the children's communication course, which was just a nightmare. I can remember. Did you do any of those kids courses? Yes. I liked, in a way, like improving communication skills was always something, even growing up, was kind of cool. But oh my gosh, I still, to this day, it's why I have a hard time meditating. When you're sitting and you're doing these TRs, which are I don't know how much to explain words or not while I'm telling this story, Aaron, like what people know.
You can just briefly, TR, training routines at Scientology's communication drills.
Yeah, there's these communication drills that you do, and you start off sitting there with your, you got your hands on your lap and your feet are on the ground and you're right in front of someone else doing the same. And first you start off with your eyes closed, just being there comfortably in front of each other, but you can't fall asleep. It's like, fine, whatever. Then you have to do it eyes open. And doing that with your sibling, who maybe you're pissed off with. And my mom used it as a form of torture. When we misbehave or we fought, she made us do these training routines, and I freaking hated it.
Yeah.
I think once I even kicked over my sister's chair and flipped her over, to which I got a big flunk start. Ooh, it's even triggering now. So we do this, we get going on, just our Scientology route. And from there we went, and my mom, she was on staff for a little bit. She was married to my stepdad. I talked about this on my podcast recently on one of my Friday episodes. My mom ended up divorcing him and marrying his dad, who was my grandpa. Grandpa Dad is kind of how we refer to him now.
Are you serious?
Yeah, totally serious.
What was your mom's name?
Donna Gale.
Donna Gale. There's two Scientologists that I remember, staff members from Hawaii, and that's Scott Mitsko and Amy Suzuki. Did you know them?
Oh, yeah. Amy, for sure. She was a supervisor. Is she still in?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know for sure. I think that she is. But if I recall correctly, Amy became the senior CS and Scott Mitsko was the core soup, and they might have gotten together.
Oh. Scott, I don't exactly recall, but I remember Amy fondly. Yeah. I can remember crying. And
I think Amy was like native Hawaiian, but so are you, right? I mean, you're native Hawaiian. Yeah.
I'm a mixed bag. Yeah.
So, okay. So you're I've always wondered how Scientology managed to ever succeed in Hawaii with such a small captive audience. Maybe someone would say they've never really succeeded in Hawaii, but the fact that the organization even still exists is amazing to me.
It's a very small group, and a lot of the hardcore OG people are still there. From what I understand, there's not many new people coming in except the children of Scientologists, which I think is kind of universal. Sometimes people, I remember people would travel for work or something to Hawaii who were on services elsewhere, and they would come in. I remember one guy was doing the purification rundown. You had to be in the sauna every day. And I remember going in and I was like his sauna partner, because when he was in town, he had to do that. When my mom married my grandpa, he was still married. In fact, what happened was we're living with my stepdad, Brian, who I adored. It was probably the most stability we ever had in our childhood were those few years that my mom was living with Brian. He was great, but still life was a bit unusual. We lived in a warehouse for a while, which was nearby to where their business was, so she could kind of keep an eye on us. Which seems like an odd solution looking back. Let's just move into the warehouse 2 doors over. That way we can keep an eye on the kids while we're at work. So we move in with I'm thinking we're moving in with the only grandparents I'd known, because after my parents split, I didn't have any contact with my biological dad or that side of the family for, I think we went like over a decade. And so these were the only grandparents that I knew. So we move into the house, and one day my mom's like, hey, I'm gonna, we're gonna get married. So my grandpa's his name was Dick. And she's like, Dick and I are gonna get married. And I'm just like, I was I think I was 12 or so then, and pretty much was just reading a book or had my headphones on. I was 11, 12 years old, just trying to like stay as far away from the crazy as I could, because my stepdad, Dick, was pretty much, he was what Scientology would refer to. And I did, when I was at different Scientology organizations later, refer to as a squirrel, where he was using Scientology tech incorrectly. The thing is, no one in the family saw it that way. He was kind of like our own cult leader of the family. He was all about L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology, but he hated the Hawaii organization. He had beef with them. So when my mom married him, we weren't really as involved with the Hawaii organization, which was kind of nice. But then we were subjected to what life was like with him. He was an alcoholic. They're getting married. My grandparents are splitting up. Despite everything that's happened, I think I am an optimist. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, at least we don't need to break in a new family. At least Christmas will be the same. Just trying to work through, process this, which I didn't process it. I just kept going. And I don't know if you can relate to this. I feel like growing up in Scientology and being in the Sea Org at such a young age, your default is survival. Your default is to survive. Your default is to get through it and you just come out the other end, whatever it takes, whatever that means, whatever that looks like.
Well, do you know who I identify with the most? Is
not my grandpa dad. I hope you're not going to say that.
Marty Bird in Ozarks.
Oh, yes. Yes.
The entire world could be burning to the ground, and Marty's just going to go, well, what do we need to do next?
Yeah.
I identify with that character so much, it's scary.
I totally get that. I think that when you grow up in Scientology and you're in the Sea Org and you come out of all that I feel like we go one of two ways. We either become extremely productive and good at what we do, or go completely the other way. Sometimes I feel like there's almost no in between. And I'm happy to share that I'm doing all right. But I had my moments of going the other way as well, in going through the whole process. After my mom married my grandpa, things got weirder. We had, when you talk about these puritanical rules, by then I was 13 and we weren't allowed to have a boyfriend. So of course I had a boyfriend, and I had never kissed a boy before. And I was meeting my boyfriend, Joseph, at the baseball field, in the dugout, good makeout spot. Cause I thought, oh, this is going to be my first kiss. So we met out there and we had this makeout session, and nothing against Joseph. He was a young kid too, but I did not even like it. I was like, this is disgusting. He put his tongue in my mouth. That's not hygienic. It's gross. I spit all the way home. I didn't let him know any of this, but I was excited I had my first kiss at 13, but I was kind of like, at the same time, well, I don't get it. I don't get the appeal. So I go home and to Grandpa Dad's house, and I tell my cousin at the time who was living with us, she lived in California, and her mom, they were all Scientologists as well. And she rats on me to Grandpa Dad, who then puts me on a plane to, now remember, I'm in Hawaii. I'm on Oahu. I had only been off the island one time when we went to California the year before, which is when my mom and Grandpa Dad went off to Vegas to get married while we were in California. And then we went to Disneyland, and it was pretty much the only family vacation we ever took. But in hindsight, I'm like, I could totally see how they were trying to distract us from the fact that they're getting married and this is bizarre. And it was like being in the Sea Org. You're seeing this train wreck, bizarre thing going on, but no one's saying anything about it. It's just, this is the way it is, because he was such a dictator within the family. He really was the leader. He had gotten through operating Thetan level 3. So he was the opinion leader in the family when it came to Scientology. Everybody who worked for him was part of the family and also Scientologists, but they didn't really always go to the org. They were getting all their information from him. So I get sent off to Moses Lake, Washington, if you've ever been. And I'm this little Hawaiian girl with my plastic jelly bean shoes in the middle of winter. I get off I don't know why nobody was like, hey, here's a jacket. Hey, here's some shoes. It's going to be different when you get there. I was sent to go live with my mom's sister, who was not a Scientologist. And she had twin daughters who were a week younger than I was, and live with them to see how other people lived, is what I was told. It was really, I was being treated like, for some reason, I was ungrateful. And I'm like, wait. In hindsight, in looking at the time, I was like, fine, get me out of here. I would love to get out of here. But looking back, I think it was really more about, I think that Grandpa Dad knew that I was kind of like, this is weird. This is not okay. I didn't directly challenge him, but I felt like it was really more about getting me out of the way for a little while. And I was there for 3 months, banished for 3 months to the freezing cold in the middle of nowhere, and was finally allowed to come back. And then when I came back, it was they had moved because, he had divorced my grandma, married my mom. So we had all moved into a different house. And from there, I think I was 13 by then. And I came back, and I knew that if I was going to be allowed back and be allowed to be there, that I just needed to kind of play the ass kissing game and just go along the best I could, put my head down and survive.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe right here.